Charlotte Bennet sat in the dimly lit study of her family's Georgian townhouse, the late afternoon sun casting golden hues over the antique furniture. A cup of tea, untouched, sat beside her, its steam curling lazily into the air. She had just opened a letter from the Whitmore family solicitors, and as she read through it again, disbelief twisted in her chest. It was as if the words had blurred into a dizzying haze. The letter claimed that the £20,000 spent by the Whitmore family on their engagement was not a gift, as Charlotte had been led to believe, but a loan. They demanded repayment, immediately. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the final sentence. They had reported her to the police for financial fraud, accusing her of misappropriating funds. Charlotte's mind raced as she tried to comprehend what she had just read. Sebastian, her fiancé, had never once mentioned this arrangement. No one had ever said a word about the money being a loan. He had promised her that everything between them, everything they shared, was genuine. She had believed in him completely, trusted him with her heart. And now, it felt as though the ground beneath her was crumbling. How could they do this to her? The Whitmore family, with all their wealth and status, had always treated her with a certain coldness, but she had never imagined they would go this far. Her fingers trembled as she set the letter down on the desk. The room seemed to close in around her as her thoughts began to spiral. She wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but this was a betrayal on a scale she hadn't anticipated. And it wasn't just about money. It was about control, manipulation, and, most of all, power. Sebastian had always been charming, always the perfect gentleman. But now she began to wonder if it had all been an act. He had never been fully transparent with her about his family or their expectations. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about money. This was about securing his position within the family, about forcing Charlotte into submission, making her feel small and helpless. As the clock ticked on, Charlotte took a deep breath, pushing aside the initial wave of anger. She had to think clearly. She had to formulate a plan. Charlotte had always prided herself on her ability to remain composed under pressure. She had been raised to handle difficult situations with grace, but this was something entirely different. They thought they could manipulate her, play on her insecurities, and intimidate her into compliance. But they had made a grave mistake. She stood up, pacing the room with a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just a financial issue, it was personal. It was a challenge to her dignity and her worth. Charlotte Bennet wasn't someone who would sit idly by while her name was dragged through the mud. But what could she do? She needed to make sure she didn't play into their hands. Confronting them head-on might give them exactly what they wanted, a reason to accuse her, to push her even further into a corner. No, she needed a more subtle approach. Her mind raced as she began to formulate a plan, an intricate, calculated plan. She wasn't going to fight them on their terms. No, she was going to show them that she was the one in control. The Whitmore family had underestimated her, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. Charlotte's thoughts turned to Sebastian. How could he have allowed this to happen? How could he have allowed his family to turn her life into a legal nightmare? She knew she needed to confront him, but she couldn't let him see the full extent of her anger, not yet. She had to remain calm, collected. She would play her part in this game of power, and she would do so with a quiet intensity that would leave the Whitmores reeling. The first step was clear: she would need to investigate. She would find out everything she could about the loan, about how the money had been spent and, more importantly, about who had made this decision within the family. It wasn't enough to simply pay back the money. No, Charlotte needed answers, and she needed them fast. As the evening sky darkened outside, Charlotte's mind was already moving forward, piecing together the next steps of her plan. She would not be a victim in this situation. She would not let the Whitmore family dictate the terms of her life. And as she sat back down at her desk, her fingers brushing over the cold paper of the letter, she knew that this was only the beginning. The following day, Charlotte awoke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. The oppressive weight of the previous evening's revelation still hung over her, but now there was a new fire burning inside her. She couldn't let Sebastian and his family manipulate her any longer. She had to take control of the situation, and she had to do it now. After a quick breakfast, Charlotte set about gathering the information she would need. She would start with the Whitmore family's financial records. She had connections, people she had met through her work and social circles, who could help her gain access to their financial documents without raising suspicion. It was a risky move, but Charlotte wasn't one to shy away from risk. The first call was to her friend, Claire Middleton. Claire had always been in the know about everything, and her network was vast. Charlotte had no doubt that Claire could help her get the information she needed. She dialed the number, the phone ringing for a few moments before Claire picked up. "Charlotte, darling. How are you?" Claire's voice was as upbeat as ever, but Charlotte could hear the faint hint of curiosity beneath it. "I'm fine, Claire, but I need a favor," Charlotte replied, trying to keep her tone steady. "It's about the Whitmores. I need to get my hands on some financial records, without anyone knowing, of course." There was a brief silence on the other end before Claire spoke again. "That's a tall order, you know. But if anyone can do it, it's me. I'll make a few calls, but you'll owe me one, darling. And I mean one." Charlotte smiled slightly, her heart racing with anticipation. "I know, Claire. I'll make sure to return the favor, don't worry." They exchanged a few more words before Charlotte ended the call. She felt a sense of relief wash over her, at least now she had a way to gather the information she needed. But there was no time to waste. The Whitmores were powerful, and they wouldn't hesitate to use their influence to make her life even more difficult if they suspected she was digging into their affairs. Charlotte spent the rest of the day going over the details of her plan. She would confront Sebastian, but only after she had all the information she needed. She couldn't afford to make a move without being fully prepared. Every step had to be calculated, precise, and executed flawlessly. By the evening, Charlotte had received the first pieces of information from Claire. It wasn't much yet, but it was enough to confirm her suspicions. The Whitmore family had been hiding something, and whatever it was bigger than she had initially thought. The next day, Charlotte decided it was time to have a conversation with Sebastian. She needed to understand how deep his involvement was in the scheme and, most importantly, why he had kept her in the dark for so long. The thought of confronting him made her stomach churn, but she couldn't afford to let her emotions get the best of her. She called him, her voice calm and controlled. "Sebastian, we need to talk. Meet me at the house tonight, around 7. There was a brief pause before he responded. "Of course, Charlotte. I'll be there." As the day dragged on, Charlotte prepared herself for the confrontation. She made sure she looked her best, sharp, confident, and in control. She couldn't afford to let Sebastian see any cracks in her armor. When the doorbell rang that evening, Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. She took a deep breath before opening the door to find Sebastian standing there, his usual charming smile in place. But this time, something felt different. The air between them was thick with tension, and Charlotte knew that the conversation they were about to have would change everything. "Come in, Sebastian," Charlotte said, her voice steady. "We need to discuss something important." As he stepped inside, Charlotte led him to the sitting room. The warmth of the fire crackled in the background, but it did little to ease the chill that had settled in the room. "I've received some troubling news, Sebastian," Charlotte began, her gaze unwavering. "It seems the Whitmore family has some financial claims against me. And I want to understand how this happened." Sebastian's smile faltered for a moment, and Charlotte could see the flicker of something, guilt, maybe, or fear, pass through his eyes. But it was gone almost immediately, replaced by a more controlled expression. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice steady but lacking the usual conviction. "Charlotte, there must be some mistake." "A mistake?" Charlotte's voice was cold now. "How is it a mistake when your family demands repayment for money I never knew was a loan?" There was a long pause before Sebastian spoke again, this time his voice softer, almost apologetic. "I didn't want to burden you with it. I thought I could handle it. I was going to explain everything, but I didn't know how to bring it up." Charlotte felt a surge of anger, but she kept it in check. "You didn't think to mention this to me. You've had months to tell me the truth, and now I find myself accused of fraud because of your family's lies." Sebastian seemed to falter for a moment, his usual confidence slipping. "Charlotte, please. Let me explain. It's not as bad as it seems." Charlotte crossed her arms, her gaze hardening. "It is as bad as it seems, Sebastian. I've already started looking into this, and I won't stop until I have the truth. The Whitmore family won't control me, not like this." The tension in the room was palpable now. Charlotte's resolve had never been clearer. She wasn't going to let Sebastian, nor anyone, push her around. The game was on, and she was in control. Sebastian looked at her, his eyes widening. "Charlotte, wait. I didn't." "No," Charlotte interrupted sharply, her voice cold. "This is where you're wrong. I'm not waiting. I'm taking control." The days following her confrontation with Sebastian were a blur. Charlotte had anticipated some level of resistance, but the silence from Sebastian was unsettling. He hadn't made any moves to deny her claims or even try to smooth things over. Instead, he had retreated, leaving her to wonder what he was hiding. Charlotte's next step was clear: she needed to dive deeper into the Whitmore family's dealings. Claire had come through for her, sending more detailed financial documents, and what Charlotte found was both shocking and disturbing. The Whitmore family had been involved in several shady business ventures, some of which were linked to illegal activities. The very wealth Sebastian had used to entrap her seemed to be built on a foundation of corruption and deceit. One evening, after a long day of sifting through documents, Charlotte decided to take a break. She needed to clear her mind, so she took a walk through the garden at the back of her house. The cool evening air filled her lungs, and for a moment, the tension in her chest eased. But as she strolled through the carefully manicured paths, a thought crossed her mind: what if this whole situation wasn't just about money? What if there was something more to Sebastian's betrayal, something far deeper? The idea gnawed at her, and she couldn't shake it. Could it be that Sebastian wasn't just a man trying to hide his family's misdeeds? Could he have been manipulated himself? The possibility seemed unlikely, but as the night wore on, Charlotte couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to the story than she understood. The following morning, Charlotte decided to confront Sebastian once more. This time, she would approach him differently. She wasn't going to accuse him outright, but rather, she would try to get him to admit his involvement in the family's hidden dealings. She called him, her voice calm and measured. "Sebastian, I think it's time we have another conversation. Meet me at the house again tonight. We need to talk about where we go from here." There was a pause on the other end of the line before he responded. "All right, Charlotte. I'll be there." By the time evening rolled around, Charlotte was ready. She had gathered her thoughts, organized the documents, and prepared for every possible reaction Sebastian might have. She wasn't going to let her emotions get the better of her this time. She was focused, determined, and in control. When Sebastian arrived, he seemed different, less confident, almost like he was bracing himself for something. Charlotte studied him closely as he stepped inside, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man on the edge, and for the first time, Charlotte saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "Come in, Sebastian," Charlotte said, her tone neutral. "We need to talk." He followed her into the sitting room, and as they both sat, Charlotte wasted no time. I've been looking into your family's financial records, she began, her voice steady. And what I found isn't what I expected. There's a lot more going on here than I initially thought. Some of it is quite disturbing. Sebastian's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly masked his reaction. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice tight. I'm talking about your family's dealings, Sebastian. The shady businesses, the money laundering, the illegal connections, Charlotte continued, watching his face carefully for any sign of guilt. How much of this did you know about? How much were you involved in? Sebastian's jaw clenched, and for a moment, he said nothing. Charlotte could feel the tension building in the room, the weight of the silence pressing down on them both. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. I didn't want any of this, Charlotte. I didn't ask for it. But I'm stuck. My family, my father, my mother, they've always been involved in this stuff. They're controlling everything, and I'm just trying to survive. I never wanted to drag you into it, but when I met you, it felt like a chance to escape. A chance to get away from all of this. Charlotte's heart raced as she processed his words. It wasn't exactly an admission of guilt, but it was close. It was a confession of sorts, an acknowledgement that Sebastian wasn't just a passive participant in his family's schemes, but that he was actively trapped in them. I'm not going to let you get away with this, Charlotte said, her voice firm. But I won't ruin you either. Not unless I have to. Sebastian looked up at her, his eyes desperate. Please, Charlotte. Don't do this. You don't know what they're capable of. If you expose this, they'll come after you. They'll destroy everything. Charlotte leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. You've already destroyed everything, Sebastian. I'm just making sure I get my due. Sebastian's face twisted with frustration, but Charlotte could see the flicker of fear in his eyes. She knew he wasn't entirely at fault for his family's crimes, but he had still made choices that had led to this moment. And now, it was up to her to decide how far she was willing to go to make him pay. The room was thick with tension as they stared at each other, neither of them willing to back down. Charlotte had a plan, and she wasn't about to let Sebastian, or his family, walk away unscathed. She had already lost too much, and now it was time to take back what was hers. The game was no longer just about money or revenge. It was about power, control, and ensuring that no one, not even the Whitmores, could stand in her way. The days that followed Charlotte's confrontation with Sebastian were tense, filled with a heavy silence. Despite her clear intentions, Sebastian had yet to offer any real explanation. His absence from their usual meetings only deepened the growing sense of uncertainty within Charlotte. She had made it clear that she knew about his family's involvement in illegal activities, yet he remained distant and unresponsive. Charlotte wasn't one to sit idly by. She knew that the only way to truly understand the depths of Sebastian's betrayal was to confront it head-on. She had already uncovered a significant amount of his family's financial dealings, but she needed more. She needed to know just how far the Whitmore family's corruption spread. With each passing day, Charlotte became more determined, more resolute. She couldn't let this end with just a handful of documents. One afternoon, as she was going through the final set of papers from Claire, Charlotte received an unexpected message, a cryptic text from Sebastian. We need to talk. Meet me at the usual place tonight. Her heart skipped a beat. What was he thinking? Did he truly intend to come clean, or was this another attempt at manipulation? Charlotte had been down this road before, and she wasn't about to fall for Sebastian's charm again. Yet, something inside her told her that this time might be different. She spent the rest of the day preparing for their meeting. Her mind was sharp, her resolve even sharper. This time, she wouldn't be fooled. She wouldn't let him get away with anything. That night, Charlotte arrived at their usual meeting spot, a small, secluded cafe near the edge of town. It was the perfect place for a private conversation, away from the prying eyes of the public. She sat at a table near the window, her eyes scanning the room as she waited. The dim lighting of the cafe created a mysterious, almost eerie atmosphere, but Charlotte felt oddly calm. Minutes later, Sebastian walked in. His usual confident stride was now replaced by a hesitancy, a clear sign that he wasn't the man who had once charmed her so effortlessly. He looked different, more worn down, as though the weight of the past few days had finally caught up with him. "Charlotte," he said, his voice low. He sat across from her, his eyes avoiding hers. "Sebastian," she replied coolly, her tone sharp. "So, you finally decided to show up. What is it you want to talk about?" Sebastian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I need to explain myself. I know you've found out about my family's dealings, but there's more to it than you think. There's a reason I've kept my distance. I didn't want you to get dragged into all of this, but now I see that I can't hide it from you any longer." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "Go on." He hesitated for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "The truth is, I didn't want to be part of my family's empire. I never asked for any of this. But when you come from a family like mine, you don't have many choices. I was trapped in a life I didn't choose. I thought if I could just distance myself, I could escape, and then I met you." Charlotte leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "So, it was all just about getting away from your family's influence. You thought using me would be your ticket out." Sebastian's face flushed with shame. "No, that's not it. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I could build a life with you, one that was separate from all of this. I truly care about you, Charlotte. But now, with everything that's come to light, I'm not sure how much time I have left. I'm in too deep, and I'm afraid of what they'll do if I try to leave for good." Charlotte felt a surge of anger rise within her. "You think you can just waltz in here and tell me it was all a misunderstanding? After everything you've put me through?" Sebastian's eyes flickered with regret, but Charlotte wasn't in the mood for his apologies. He had already proven how little he cared about her when he had betrayed her trust. The words he spoke now felt empty. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I'm asking you to believe me. I want out of this life, Charlotte. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Charlotte studied him carefully. She could see the desperation in his eyes, but that didn't make his betrayal any less painful. How could she trust him again after everything that had happened? After the lies, the deceit, and the manipulation. The silence between them grew thicker, both of them caught in a web of emotions they couldn't untangle. Charlotte had been through so much already. She had been betrayed by someone she once loved, and now she was faced with the man who had been a part of her destruction. She didn't know whether to trust his words or to walk away forever. "I need time to think," Charlotte said at last, her voice firm. "But don't expect me to just forgive you. Not after everything." Sebastian nodded, his expression one of resignation. He knew he had lost her, but he wasn't ready to give up on her completely. He couldn't afford to. Not when everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was now crumbling before him. "I understand," he replied softly. "But just know that I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." As he stood up and left the cafe, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something much bigger than she had anticipated. This was no longer just about revenge or getting back at Sebastian. It was about taking control of her own future, and making sure Sebastian couldn't destroy it any further. But the question remained, would she let him back in? Would she let him destroy her once more, or would she finally take the power back for herself? Only time would tell. The weeks that followed Charlotte's tense conversation with Sebastian were a whirlwind of emotions. Her thoughts were constantly tangled between her desire for revenge and her need to protect herself from further harm. Every time she tried to distance herself from the situation, something pulled her back in, whether it was Sebastian's insistence or the nagging sense that her entire world was on the brink of collapse. Sebastian had been in touch sporadically, sending her a mix of cryptic texts and emotional apologies. Each time Charlotte would consider reaching out, she remembered how deep the betrayal ran. She couldn't risk letting him back into her life. Not without being certain of his intentions. But the problem was, she didn't know if she could trust anyone anymore. One afternoon, Charlotte received an unexpected call from Claire. The voice on the other end was strained, filled with urgency. "Charlotte, I've found something." "Something big," Claire said, her voice trembling with fear. "It's about Sebastian's family, and I think you need to see it." "It's bad, Charlotte. Worse than I ever imagined." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. Claire had been her ally through all of this, her trusted confidant. If Claire was scared, then whatever she had uncovered was not something to ignore. "Where are you?" Charlotte asked quickly, her voice steady despite the growing tension in her chest. "I'm at the office," Claire responded. "Come quickly. We don't have much time." Charlotte didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, her mind racing. What could Claire have possibly uncovered? And why was it so urgent? Every second counted. When Charlotte arrived at Claire's office, she was immediately led to the back room where Claire had been working tirelessly to uncover the Whitmore family's secrets. The walls were covered with documents, files, pictures, and evidence that painted a damning picture of the family's criminal empire. Claire pulled out a thick folder, handing it to Charlotte with trembling hands. "This is what I found. It's all here, everything. The illegal dealings, the money laundering, the connections to dangerous people. It's enough to bring down the entire Whitmore family, Charlotte." Charlotte took the folder, her fingers shaking slightly as she flipped through the documents. What she saw inside confirmed everything she had feared. Sebastian wasn't just involved in his family's illegal activities, he was deeply entrenched in them. And worse, he had been lying to Charlotte from the start. She looked up at Claire, her expression hardening. "We need to act quickly. This needs to be exposed, before they have a chance to silence us." Claire nodded, her face pale. "I'm afraid it's already too late for that. They know we're onto them. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their empire. And I'm not sure we can stop them." Charlotte felt a cold chill run down her spine. The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about her and Sebastian anymore. It was about survival. "I don't care what it takes," Charlotte said firmly, her voice cold and determined. "We expose them. We take them down. And we start with Sebastian." Claire stared at her, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you sure? Sebastian is not just some pawn in all this. He's been a part of it from the beginning. You don't know what they're capable of. They will come after us, Charlotte." Charlotte took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. She had spent too long letting Sebastian manipulate her, letting him control her emotions. But no more. She would be the one pulling the strings from here on out. "I'm ready," Charlotte said. "I'll make sure they regret crossing me." The next few days were filled with constant planning and preparation. Charlotte and Claire worked together in secrecy, each step bringing them closer to exposing the Whitmore family's criminal activities. But with every piece of information they uncovered, the danger grew more real. Charlotte could feel it in the air, a heavy sense of dread that was impossible to ignore. Sebastian had become more persistent in trying to reach her, his messages growing increasingly desperate. He begged Charlotte to meet with him, to talk things through, to fix what was broken between them. But Charlotte knew better. She wasn't foolish enough to fall for his pleas. She had seen the darker side of him, the manipulative side that he had tried so hard to hide. This time, she wouldn't make the same mistake. With Claire's help, Charlotte began to set her plan into motion. They contacted the right people, those who could help them bring down the Whitmore family once and for all. The evidence they had gathered was more than enough to make a powerful case. The only obstacle left was timing. They needed to act before Sebastian realized they were onto him. On a cold, rainy evening, Charlotte received a call that would change everything. It was from an unknown number, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Charlotte," Sebastian's voice echoed through the phone. "I know what you're planning. And if you think you're going to take me down, you're making a huge mistake. You don't know who you're messing with." Charlotte's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "I know exactly who I'm messing with, Sebastian. And I'm not afraid anymore." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low laugh. "You should be," he said. "I'll make sure you regret this. You don't get to ruin my life and walk away unscathed." Charlotte's grip tightened on the phone. She had been waiting for this moment, and now it was here. The threat in his voice only solidified her resolve. She had made up her mind. There was no turning back. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," Charlotte said calmly, her voice unwavering. "You'll regret ever crossing me." She hung up the phone without waiting for a response. She could feel the weight of what she was about to do, but she was ready. It was time to take back control. Charlotte knew that everything was in place. She and Claire had worked tirelessly to gather the evidence they needed, and now the time had come to bring Sebastian and his family to justice. As the days passed, the tension in the air was palpable. Charlotte's heart pounded with anticipation, knowing that the next few hours would determine everything. The plan was simple but dangerous. Charlotte would confront Sebastian at a gala his family was hosting in the heart of London, where the Whitmore name still held significant influence. It was the perfect setting for a final showdown, with everyone from the city's elite in attendance. The moment of truth was closing in. On the night of the event, Charlotte was dressed to perfection, her black dress hugging her figure as she made her way through the crowd. Claire, ever the strategist, had arranged for their key allies to be stationed in strategic positions. This was it, the night that would expose everything. As Charlotte approached the Whitmore family's table, her eyes locked onto Sebastian, who was laughing with his colleagues, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. But when he saw Charlotte, his smile faltered. He stood up, his face a mask of surprise and then concern. He had no idea what was coming. Charlotte walked straight up to him, her presence commanding the room. "Sebastian," she said, her voice cool and composed, "we need to talk." He tried to hide his discomfort with a forced grin. "Charlotte, I wasn't expecting you here tonight. I thought we agreed to let things go." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Did you really think I'd let you get away with everything? The lies, the manipulation, the criminal activities your family has been hiding." The tension in the room grew thick as everyone around them fell silent, sensing the gravity of the situation. Sebastian's smile faded completely, replaced by a mixture of fear and anger. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice low and threatening. "You're making a mistake, Charlotte. You don't know what you're doing." Charlotte glanced at the crowd, then back at him. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I've already exposed your family's dirty secrets. It's only a matter of time before everyone finds out. But I wanted you to hear it from me." Before Sebastian could react, Claire stepped forward, holding a folder of documents in her hands. She handed it to a nearby police officer, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines. The officer opened the folder and began reading the incriminating evidence aloud. The room was filled with gasps of shock as the officer revealed the Whitmore family's involvement in money laundering, bribery, and several other illegal activities. Charlotte watched as Sebastian's face drained of color, and his once untouchable world began to crumble. You can't do this," Sebastian stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "You can't ruin my family's name." Charlotte's expression softened slightly, but her resolve never wavered. "You did that long before I ever came into the picture, Sebastian. You just didn't realize it. With that, the police moved in, arresting Sebastian and several members of his family on the spot. Charlotte stood tall, watching as they were led away in handcuffs, their once immense power reduced to nothing. As the chaos unfolded, Charlotte finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had done it. The Whitmores were finished. The silence in the room was deafening. It was a stark contrast to the noise that had filled the gala moments ago. People were still processing what had just occurred, the fall of one of the most powerful families in London now playing out in real time before their eyes. The whispers began almost immediately, but Charlotte remained unfazed. She had won. Sebastian and his family had been taken away, and the Whitmore name, which had once carried such weight, was now tarnished beyond repair. The police were already beginning their investigation, sifting through piles of evidence that Charlotte and Claire had so carefully assembled. But for Charlotte, the victory was not just about exposing the truth, it was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. As she stood there, watching the officers leave with Sebastian in custody, her mind wandered to everything she had endured. The heartbreak, the manipulation, the constant feeling of being trapped in someone else's game. But now, she was free. Claire approached Charlotte with a smile, her face glowing with satisfaction. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with pride. Charlotte turned to her, her expression a mix of relief and determination. "No. We did it. This wasn't just me. You stood by me every step of the way." Claire nodded, her eyes softening. "I'm just glad we could make things right." The two women stood in silence for a moment, watching as the remnants of the Whitmore empire crumbled before them. The room, once filled with whispers of scandal and lies, was now marked by the undeniable truth. The truth that Charlotte had fought so hard to reveal. As the night drew to a close, Charlotte found herself standing alone on the balcony of the venue. The city lights below seemed to sparkle in the distance, a reminder of the life she had reclaimed. Her hands rested on the cold railing, the cool breeze tugging at her hair. She had done it. She had taken control of her life. But as she looked out over the city, she knew this was only the beginning. There would be more battles, more challenges ahead. But she was ready. She had learned the hard way how to fight for herself, and now, there was nothing and no one who could stand in her way. From this moment on, Charlotte was the master of her own fate. The days following the gala were a blur for Charlotte. Headlines screamed about the fall of the Whitmore family, and whispers about Sebastian's deceit echoed in every corner of the city. But for Charlotte, the world had shifted. She no longer felt like the woman trapped in a gilded cage. She was free, and with that freedom came a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Claire was by her side every step of the way, supporting her through the legal proceedings and helping her rebuild her life. Together, they turned Charlotte's story into a beacon for other women who had suffered in silence. They started a foundation dedicated to helping victims of manipulation and betrayal, giving them the tools to regain control of their lives just as Charlotte had done. Sebastian's trial was a media sensation, but the more he tried to twist the narrative, the more he sunk deeper into his lies. The truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how hard you tried to bury it. As the months passed, Charlotte watched as her ex-husband's world crumbled further. His reputation, his wealth, everything he had built, was now tarnished beyond repair. But Charlotte felt no satisfaction in his downfall. It wasn't about revenge, it had never been. It was about her own redemption, her own healing. She didn't need to drag him down any further. Life, she knew, would do that for him. One morning, as she stood in front of her large window, overlooking the bustling streets of London, Charlotte felt a sense of calm wash over her. The city was alive with movement, the streets full of energy. She had once felt a part of the whirlwind, trapped in its momentum. But now, she was outside of it all, watching the chaos from a place of strength and clarity. She thought about what lay ahead, new opportunities, new challenges, and most importantly, new beginnings. The past was behind her, but the lessons it had taught her were imprinted on her soul. A knock on the door broke her reverie, and Claire entered, a cup of tea in her hands. "Thought you might need this," she said with a smile. Charlotte took the tea gratefully and smiled back. "Thank you. I've been thinking about everything. How far I've come." Claire sat down beside her. "You've come a long way, Charlotte. You're stronger than you realize." Charlotte looked out the window again, her thoughts peaceful. "I used to think I was weak, that I couldn't survive. But I've learned something important. Strength doesn't come from what you can endure. It comes from what you can overcome." Claire nodded. "And you've overcome so much." Charlotte smiled, her eyes gleaming with a newfound determination. "This is just the beginning. I've got a whole new life ahead of me. And I'm going to live it on my terms." The two women sat in silence, sipping their tea, knowing that the journey ahead would be their own. No more lies. No more manipulation. Just the freedom to live, to be, and to create a future on their own terms.